Okay. Well, good morning. Again, we are in Jeremiah. This morning, we're going to examine chapters 38 and 39. And as I mention each week, Jeremiah is not written chronologically. In today's work, in today's chapters, what is going on, certainly, as we'll read, there is the Babylonian army, the Chaldean army, that is surrounding the city, besieging the city, and things are looking grim. All right, so the first question on page 53 in our workbook is, what was the reaction of the princes of Judah to Jeremiah's admonitions? See, his admonition is found in verse 2. He who remains in this city shall die by the sword, by famine, and by pestilence. But he who goes over the Chaldeans shall live. His life shall be as a prize to him, and he shall live. So, this is not the first time we've heard that admonition. Jeremiah has given it several times. But that admonition is very straightforward. All right? If you surrender to the Chaldeans, you'll live. If you stay in the city and fight them, you're going to die. That's just exactly the way it is. Well, the princes of Judah, of course, didn't like it. All right, will someone read verse 4? Verse 4 of chapter 38. This is the reaction. Go ahead.
Therefore the princes said to the king, "Please let this man be put to death. For thus he weakens the hands of the men of war who remain in this city, and the hands of all the people by speaking such words to them. For this man does not seek the welfare of this people, but their harm."
See, the princes said, we don't like what he's saying. See, what he's saying is demoralizing the people. It's taking the strength and the determination from our soldiers. Well, Jeremiah had already told them, don't fight. You will die if you fight. And that's what Jeremiah is telling them. Well, the princes said, well, that's demoralizing the soldiers. Well, it's because the people weren't listening. So the princes are saying, you know, the best thing to do, let's just kill Jeremiah. Let's kill the messenger. We don't like the message. So if we kill the messenger, we won't have to hear it anymore. And so what did they do? Verse 6, they cast him into the dungeon. That's what they did. So, you know, Zedekiah had told the princes, okay, I mean, Zedekiah was a king in name only. He didn't even have control of his own subordinates, the princes. And he had told them in verse 5, the king can do nothing against you. So the king was pretty well powerless, in a sense, as far as the princes were concerned. So the princes took Jeremiah and cast him into a dungeon. And it said they let him down, this is verse 6, with ropes, and in the dungeon there was no water but mire. So Jeremiah sank in the mire. This was probably like a big cistern, and at the bottom was just mud. And apparently it was pretty deep because they had to let Jeremiah down with ropes. So this was a pretty deep, like well or cistern that at least some of the time had water in it. And now it had muck at the bottom of it. So we see, and you know, in question 2, I kind of already answered it. What did this incident reveal about the effectiveness of Zedekiah's authority and leadership? Well, he didn't have any. He didn't have any effectiveness with his subordinates, with those princes. They should have listened to anything he said. But these princes basically, you know, didn't care anything about the king, didn't follow what he said. So this just shows that Zedekiah at this time had no authority, or at least he didn't use it effectively. So, question 3, describe the conditions of Jeremiah's incarceration. All right, well, we read verse 6. He's in a dungeon. He's deep down. He's in a cistern. So, would someone read verse 9 now?
My lord, the king, these men have done evil in all that they have done to Jeremiah the prophet, whom they have cast into the dungeon, and he is likely to die from hunger in the place where he is, for there is no bread in the city.
Okay, so this Ethiopian, we'll hear more about him in the next chapter, but he was on Jeremiah's side. He was trying to help Jeremiah, and so he's telling the king, hey, there's no food. And of course, at this time, the situation in Jerusalem is getting dire. You know, when we go back and read, I guess it's toward the end of 2 Kings, about the situation there. You know, there's not going to be any food, and so the people revert to cannibalism. They even start killing their own kids and eating them. So, you know, the situation is really, really bad. And so that's what this Ethiopian is, you know, telling him, if we leave Jeremiah down there, he's going to die, period. All right? That's just the way it is. He's going to die. There's not any way he's not going to die. Because there's not only no food in the dungeon, there's no food in the city. So, you know, again, it was, these were very dark times. And I looked up this siege by Nebuchadnezzar's army was from like January of 588 to July of 587. And so this was like, a year and a half that Nebuchadnezzar's army had come there and started the siege of the city. And of course, when that started, the only food that Jerusalem had was what was already in the city, because they couldn't get any from outside because the city was surrounded by the army. So as that food was eaten up, there was less and less and less food, and then it got to the point where there was no food whatsoever. And people were trying to eat leather, they were trying to eat, you know, whatever. So, you know, the times are awful. And so by around the 6th month, which would have been mid-July of 588, there was basically no food left at all, and that's when the cannibalism started. And it's estimated that probably no more than half of the people in the city survived. So, you know, no wonder he says there's no bread in the city. These are some of the worst times ever. Okay, moving on to question 5. What did Jeremiah think of Zedekiah's character based upon past experiences with the king? All right, we go down to verse 14. And would someone read, let's see, just verses 14 and 15 I think will be sufficient. 14 and 15.
Then Zedekiah the king sent, and had Jeremiah the prophet brought to him at the third entrance of the house of the Lord. And the king said to Jeremiah, I will ask you something, hide nothing from me. Then Jeremiah said to Zedekiah, if I declare it to you, will you not surely put me to death? And if I give you counsel, you will not listen to me.
See? This is Jeremiah says, I don't trust you, king. I mean, that's just it. I don't trust anything you say. Prior to this, they had, Zedekiah had taken like 30 of his soldiers to get Jeremiah out of the dungeon. And they take a bunch of clothes and rags to put under the ropes so that it won't hurt Jeremiah when they pull him out. So they pull him out of the dungeon. That happens in 11 through 13. And so Jeremiah is remaining there in the court of the prison. Well, then this is Zedekiah's basic response. And the king says, you know, I'm going to ask you something and don't hide anything from me. And Jeremiah says, I don't believe a word you say. Okay? There's quite a lesson there. Okay, question 6. What was Jeremiah... Oh,
Is there any significance, or what do we know of anything when it says the third entrance?
oh yeah, there was, that was one of the gates, I think, if I remember. I did read that this week, but I didn't write it down.
I was just curious, because it was just
Yeah.
so particular.
Yeah, there was there were different entrances to the house, so really wasn't a gate. I guess it's more like a doorway. I did read about that this week, but I didn't write it down.
It
So
sounds like it was like a secret entrance where people couldn't see you coming and going.
that's probably what it was. Yeah, hidden in some respect. Yeah. Okay, question 6. What was Jeremiah's word to Zedekiah, and what was the basis of Zedekiah's fear? All right, still in chapter 38, in verse 17, says, Then Jeremiah said to Zedekiah, Thus says the Lord, the God of hosts, the God of Israel, If you surely surrender to the king of Babylon's princes, then your soul shall live. This city shall not be burned with fire, and you and your house shall live. But if you do not surrender to the king of Babylon's princes, then this city shall be given into the hand of the Chaldeans. They shall burn it with fire, and you shall not escape from their hand. So Jeremiah is telling Zedekiah, surrender. Surrender. That's what, if you want to live, surrender. Don't fight. Don't do any of this. Just surrender. Well, Zedekiah was afraid. Verse 19. Would someone read 19? This is what he was afraid of.
Then King Zedekiah said to Jeremiah, I dread the Jews who have gone over to the Chaldeans, for they may give me over into their hand, and they will abuse me.
See, that's what he was afraid of. See, there were a number of Jews who had already defected to the Chaldeans, and so Zedekiah is afraid of it. He's afraid of those Jews who had already defected, that they would basically turn on him and, as it says, deliver him into their hand. And so he was afraid of that. Afraid of what might happen. Okay, 7, give further evidence of Zedekiah's fear of the princes of Judah. So when you go down and look, beginning in verse 24, Zedekiah says to Jeremiah, Let no one know of these words, and you shall not die. But if the princes hear that I have talked with you, and they come to you and say to you, Declare to us now what you have said to the king, and also what the king said to you, do not hide it from us, and we will not put you to death. Then you shall say to them, I presented my request before the king, but he would not make me return to Jonathan's house to die there. They basically, these princes, Zedekiah is just terrified of them. Even though he's the top authority, legally, he's the king, the princes are going to tell Jeremiah, what did the king tell you? What did the king tell you? And what did you tell the king? And Jeremiah is just to basically tell them the least information. All you do is tell them that you made a request before the king, and that the king was not going to make you return to Jonathan's house to die. I mean, of course, all that's true. It's just, there was a whole lot more to it, but he was just to tell them the basic information. That's all. So in verse 27, it says, Then all the princes came to Jeremiah and asked him, and he told them according to all these words that the king had commanded. So they stopped speaking with him, for the conversation had not been heard. So Jeremiah remains in the court of the prison, and notice, until the day that Jerusalem was taken. See, Jeremiah stays in Jerusalem until basically the end. Until the end. And of course, then that's where the book of Lamentations comes from, when he sees what has happened to the city of Jerusalem and the people. That's what Lamentations is all about. Okay, now we get into chapter 39. It talks about the fall. When the city of Jerusalem fell to the Babylonians, what happened to Zedekiah? All right. And again, this is in the 9th year of Zedekiah, king of Judah. So we have again the time frame of when this is happening. It says Nebuchadnezzar, his army besieged Jerusalem, and then in the 11th year, in the 4th month, again we're talking about a year and a half, the city was penetrated. And of course these siege works, how they would siege a city, you know, they would build up a ramp so they could get into the city walls and destroy it with any type of ram or whatever. So, say the city was penetrated, verse 3, then we've got some new princes, not the princes of Judah, but the princes of Babylon. We might say kind of the sub-rulers underneath Nebuchadnezzar. What did Zedekiah do? Would someone read verse 4 now? 39, verse 4.
So it was when Zedekiah the king of Judah and all the men of war saw them, that they fled and went out of the city by night, by way of the king's garden, by the gate between the two walls. And he went out by way of the plain.
And this is exactly what Jeremiah told him not to do. Jeremiah told him, just surrender. Just surrender. That's what you need to do. If you try and escape, if you try and fight, if you try to do anything, it's going to be bad. Well, of course, we know what happens in the next verse. The Chaldean army pursues them and overtakes them, captures them. And then verse 6, the king of Babylon kills Zedekiah's sons right before his eyes. And then the king kills all the nobles of Judah. Apparently all those princes. And then he puts out Zedekiah's eyes and bounds him with bronze fetters. This was real customary when one king would take another king captive. He would often put out his eyes. That was just, one of the common things. Okay, question 9. What happened to the people, the city, and the temple? Well, in verses 8 through 10. If someone would read those 3 verses, this kind of sums up what happens to Jerusalem and the people. 8 through 10.
And the Chaldeans burned the king's house and the houses of the people with fire and broke down the walls of Jerusalem. Then
Zeradan, I guess. I don't know.
the captain of the guard carried away captive to Babylon the remnant of the people who remained in the city, and those who defected to him with the rest of the people who remained. But Nebuchadnezzar, the captain of the guard, left in the land of Judah the poor people who had nothing, and gave them vineyards and fields at the same time.
Okay, so this is kind of a summation. More information is found in 2 Chronicles 36. But the city was burned. Everything that could burn was burned. The temple, the king's house, all of that. And all the people were taken, just like Jeremiah said they would be, except the poor. Those were the only ones left there in Jerusalem. And again, Jeremiah was one of those. Jeremiah was one of the ones who was left. And so the poor people basically were the ones that would take care of the crops in the future, the vineyards and the fields. All right, question 10. What did the king of Babylon do with Jeremiah? In verses 11 and 12, Nebuchadnezzar gives charge to this Nebuzaradan person, and he tells him, this is what you're to do. Verse 12, take him and look after him and do him no harm, but do to him just as he says to you. That's what. You look after him, you take care of him, make sure no harm comes to him at all. And it says, the end of verse 14, so he dwelt among the people. So that's what Jeremiah did. So he was taken from the court of the prison, but he was watched over and looked after, if you will. So, then he was committed then to this Gedaliah, which we'll learn more about him in the next chapter. Question 11, what was the message to this Ebed-Melech? Remember, this is the Ethiopian who had helped Jeremiah get out of the dungeon. This is the same person. So it says in verses 15 through 18 that, or in verse 15, the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah while he was shut up in the court of the prison. Go and speak to this Ebed-Melech, the Ethiopian. It says, behold, I will bring my words upon this city for adversity and not for good, and they shall be performed in that day before you. But I will deliver you in that day, and you shall not be given into the hand of the men of whom you are afraid. So this Ethiopian, he would be delivered. And of course he would be delivered from these men. This seems to be a different time period than what we've just read in the past basic 2 chapters. This apparently reverts back to a slightly earlier period, maybe like weeks or months before. But anyway, it's all in about the same time frame. And then we end up in question 12. Contrast this Ebed-Melech's trust in the Lord and Zedekiah's fear. Well, if you look in some of those verses there, especially Proverbs and Psalms, this is all about, if you want to live, trust in God. That's what those verses are about. See, this Ethiopian trusted in God and lived. Zedekiah, no. He didn't trust in God. He didn't listen to Jeremiah. And so all of these awful things happened to Zedekiah because he didn't trust in God's word. And it's a tremendously good lesson, because verse 18 ends up by saying, because you have put your trust in me, says the Lord. And that's why he was delivered and looked after, didn't have any harm come to him, because he put his trust in God. And it's a tremendously good lesson. Any questions?
I'm really curious about Zedekiah, why he called him there and had him give an honest prophecy and then didn't listen to it. Why would you even bother with that? Are you testing whether or not it's really going to be true?
Yeah, exactly. That's a very good question, and we're really not told, but that's a very good possibility. Yeah. Zedekiah was, he was very fickle. Very fickle king in so many ways. In so many ways. So, all right, well, thank you very much, and Lord willing, we'll look at the next 2 chapters next week when we'll learn more about this Gedaliah.